My grandmother publicly congratulated me for handling a $3 million trust fund I never knew existed. My mother, who stole it, just smiled. She didn't know I was a data analyst, so I set a trap that led her to a courtroom. This is where the story truly begins, and you won't want to miss what happens. Make sure you're subscribed to see it through to the end. We're always curious. Where in the world are you all watching from today? Let us know in the comments. The restaurant was loud, but the silence that fell over our table was deafening. It was a thick, heavy blanket that smothered the clinking of distant champagne flutes and the murmur of other families celebrating. I was sitting at the head of the table, still wearing my dark blue graduation cap, the tassel tickling my cheek. My new diploma, housed in a heavy faux leather folder, sat on my lap. I felt a migraine blooming behind my right eye, a familiar, throbbing pain that always signaled high stress. It had been a long, grueling day of ceremonies, and all I wanted was to eat my sea bass, go home, and sleep for a week. My grandmother, Matilda, was the one who had silenced the table. She stood, her spine remarkably straight for a woman of 78, and tapped her crystal water glass with a silver spoon. The ringing was sharp and clear, cutting through my exhaustion. "A toast," she'd announced, her voice, though thinned with age, still carrying the same authority that had built her real estate empire. My parents, Catherine and David, immediately turned to her, their faces arranged in practiced smiles. "To my granddaughter, Rachel," Matilda said, her sharp blue eyes finding mine. "4 years of hard work, graduating with honors in. What is it again, dear? Data analytics? Sounds dreadfully boring, but I'm told it's very important." A few polite chuckles went around the table. I managed a weak smile. "But more than the degree," Matilda continued, "I am so proud of how you've handled the $3 million I set aside for you." The words hit me like a physical blow. The air in my lungs evaporated. My polite smile froze, then cracked. I just sat there, staring, my mind a complete, echoing void. "What?" "I told Catherine all those years ago," Matilda went on, oblivious to the bomb she had just detonated, "that a young woman must have her own resources. I must say, Rachel, your humility has been remarkable. Most young people would have spent it all by now, but to have managed it so quietly, to have never mentioned it. Well, it just confirms I made the—" She stopped. Her own smile faltered as she finally registered my expression. I wasn't beaming with pride. I was pale, my mouth slightly open, my eyes wide with a confusion so profound it bordered on terror. $3 million, I whispered. The word felt alien in my mouth. What $3 million? My grandmother's gaze slowly, dangerously, shifted from me to my mother. My mother, Catherine, was a portrait of manufactured calm. She was a boutique financial advisor, and she looked the part, impeccable blonde bob, a silk blouse that probably cost more than my entire semester's textbook budget, and a string of pearls. She was smiling, but the smile didn't reach her eyes. It was a tight, brittle thing, like a crack in a porcelain doll. "Mom," my mother said, her voice a strained, light laugh, "you know we discussed this. We invested that money for Rachel's future. It's all very complex. This isn't the time or place." "Invested it?" Matilda's voice had lost all its warmth. It was now pure, cold steel. "I set up a trust, Catherine, not a speculative fund. The terms were explicit. Rachel was to have full access and knowledge upon her 18th birthday. She is 22. "Grandma," I said, my voice shaking. I looked from her face to my mother's. I don't know what you're talking about. What trust?" My father, David, finally spoke. He was a man who lived in the shadow of these two powerful women, my mother and grandmother. He was a good architect but a passive man, and he looked completely lost, his napkin clutched in his fist. "Rachel, honey, it's your college fund. Your mother has been managing your college fund. Matilda, you're confusing her." "A college fund?" Matilda snapped, her eyes locking onto my mother. "Do not patronize me, David. I am talking about the Matilda Vance Trust for Rachel, established in her name with $3 million. I have received the annual reports from you, Catherine, for the last 4 years. Reports that I was led to believe Rachel was helping you prepare." My mother's smile finally vanished. Her face went as white as the tablecloth. The reports. I knew about the reports. Every year, my mother would lock herself in her home office for a weekend, complaining about my grandmother's archaic financial demands. She always told me it was just boring estate paperwork. I'd always had a modest college fund, she'd said. It was just enough to cover tuition at the T University, provided I also worked part-time at the library and took out some small, manageable student loans to cover my living expenses. I had spent the last 4 years budgeting every coffee, buying second-hand textbooks, and feeling a constant, low-grade hum of financial anxiety. I had $18,000 in student debt. And she was talking about $3 million. What? I tried to form a sentence, but the throbbing in my head was now a deafening drumbeat. I looked at my mother, who refused to meet my gaze. She was staring at her wine glass, her knuckles white as she gripped the stem. The silence that followed was the loudest sound I had ever heard. The other diners, the waiters, the entire world seemed to melt away, leaving only the 4 of us at that table, suspended in a moment of sickening revelation. My father was looking at my mother with dawning horror. My grandmother was looking at her with pure, unfiltered rage. And I was looking at the woman who had raised me, the woman I had trusted implicitly, and seeing a stranger. A thief. The betrayal was worse than the shock of the money itself. The drive home was a masterclass in silent warfare. My father drove, his hands gripping the steering wheel so tightly I thought it might snap. My grandmother, Matilda, had refused to ride with us. She had simply looked at my mother, her face a mask of contempt, and said, "I will be calling my lawyer. And then I will be calling your lawyer." She had taken a taxi back to her hotel. So it was just the 3 of us in the car, suffocating in the unsaid. My mother, Catherine, sat in the passenger seat, staring straight ahead, a single, furious tear tracking silently down her cheek. It wasn't a tear of remorse. I knew her well enough to know it was a tear of anger. She was angry she'd been caught. I sat in the back, my diploma folder digging into my thighs. The migraine was now a full-blown assault, painting spots of light across my vision. Every time my father hit a bump, a fresh wave of nausea washed over me. "You have to understand," my mother finally said, her voice dangerously quiet as we pulled into our driveway. My father slammed the car into park and killed the engine, plunging us into the darkness of the garage. "Understand what, Catherine?" he hissed. It was the first time I'd heard him use that tone with her. "Understand that you've been lying to me, to our daughter, $3 million, where is it?" "It's not gone," she spat, turning to face him. "It's invested. It's complicated. That money was just sitting there doing nothing. I put it to work for this family." "Put it to work how?" I asked, my voice barely a croak from the back seat. "By letting me take out student loans. By letting me work 20 hours a week at the library shelving books while I was trying to study for my data analytics midterms." "That built character?" she snapped, twisting in her seat to glare at me. The venom in her voice shocked me. "You think the world just hands you things, Rachel? You're so naive. Your grandmother hands you a fortune and you're supposed to what? Just sit on it. I made it grow. I used it." "You used it," I repeated, the numbness starting to recede, replaced by a cold, sharp anger. "You used my money." "It's not your money," she yelled. "It's family money. It paid for this house. It paid for your father's new office when his firm was struggling. It paid for everything." My father, who had been listening with a look of growing sickness, recoiled. What do you mean, my firm?" "Oh, don't be so sanctimonious, David," she sneered. "That angel investor who saved you 2 years ago, it was me. It was Rachel's trust fund. I saved us." My father got out of the car and threw up in the bushes by the garage door. I stumbled out after him, my legs shaking. I left my diploma in the back seat. It suddenly felt worthless. I walked past my father, who was leaning against the garage wall, breathing heavily, and went straight to my room. I locked the door, ignoring my mother's sudden, panicked cries of, "Rachel, wait. Let's talk about this." I sat on my bed, the one I'd had since I was 10, and I just stared at the wall. The whole thing felt like a fever dream. The graduation, the dinner, the revelation. But as I sat there, the numbness began to clear, and my brain, the one I had just spent 4 years training to see patterns in chaos, started to work. My mother's words echoed in my head. "I have received the annual reports from you, Catherine." My grandmother had said that, and my mother had always complained about the boring estate paperwork. But there was one detail, one tiny, crucial thing they had both forgot. For the past 2 years, as part of my advanced analytics curriculum, I had been helping my mother with her boring work. Not the trust, I'd never seen that. But I had helped her digitize her client files, set up her spreadsheets, and manage her college fund accounts. He'd called me her little data whiz, praising my meticulousness. I had helped her build the very system she'd used to lie to me. I thought about the modest, college fund statements she'd always shown me. They were on official-looking letterhead from a small, independent brokerage I'd never heard of. I had always accepted them at face value. But they had forgotten one crucial thing. They had forgotten that I wasn't just a 22-year-old girl in a graduation cap. I was a data analyst, and I had the original files. I had copies of every statement, every transaction log she had ever let me touch, all backed up on a personal hard drive she didn't know about. I always backed up my work. My mother thought I was a naive girl. She was about to find out I was a forensic investigator. The next morning, I woke up with a pounding headache and a stomach full of lead. My cap and gown were crumpled in a heap on my floor. I checked my phone. 15 missed calls from my father. 7 from my grandmother. 10 texts from my mother, escalating from "Rachel, honey, please come out" to "You are being incredibly childish," and finally to "You are grounded. We are not done with this conversation." Grounded? I was 22, a college graduate, and my mother, a woman who had just confessed to stealing millions from me, was trying to ground me. The absurdity of it was almost comical. I ignored them all. I walked downstairs. My father was asleep on the couch, still in his suit from last night. He looked gray and broken. My mother was nowhere to be seen, but the smell of stale coffee and her expensive, cloying perfume hung in the air. Her home office door was closed. I went into the kitchen, grabbed a bottle of water, a box of protein bars, and my laptop. I went back to my room, locked the door, and got to work. My mother, Catherine, had always been a complex figure in my life. She was polished, ambitious, and deeply, deeply concerned with appearances. She grew up in the shadow of her own mother, Matilda, a self-made woman who had built an empire from scratch. Matilda was brilliant, demanding, and often blunt. Catherine, by contrast, had built her life on a foundation of image. Her job as a boutique financial advisor was, I now realized, more about networking with wealthy clients at luncheons than it was about actual financial strategy. Her resentment for Matilda was her defining characteristic. She saw Matilda's wealth not as a family asset, but as a personal insult, a constant reminder of her own perceived shortcomings. And I, as Matilda's only grandchild and clear favorite, was caught in the middle. My whole life, my mother had preached the gospel of sacrifice. "We can't afford that, Rachel," she'd sigh, when I'd ask for the same brand-name sneakers my friends had. "We're comfortable, but we're not Matilda-level wealthy. We have to be smart." She had me on a budget my entire life. She was the one who insisted I get a job at 16. She was the one who sat me down to explain the harsh realities of student loans. I had spent years feeling grateful for her financial prudence, proud that I was pulling my own weight. I saw her sacrifices, the long hours, the networking events, as proof of her devotion. I had worshipped her. Now, sitting in the quiet of my childhood bedroom, that worship curdled into a cold, hard rage. Every sacrifice she'd made, every lecture on fiscal responsibility was a lie. A performance. She hadn't been teaching me responsibility. She had been grooming me to accept scarcity so I would never question the numbers. I plugged in my external hard drive. The files were all there, just as I'd left them. 2 years' worth of statements from the college fund, which was supposedly held by a firm called Apex Holdings. A quick Google search for Apex Holdings brought up a single-page website with a stock photo of a skyline and a P.O. box address. It was a shell, a complete fabrication. I pulled up the Excel files I had so diligently created for her. I had transaction logs, dates, and amounts. I had copies of the simplified reports she'd let me scan, the ones I now realized she was sending to my grandmother. The narrative was clear. The reports for Matilda showed a single, stable trust, growing at a modest, believable 4% a year. The college fund statements she gave me showed a small, separate account with just enough money for tuition, which she topped up with investment dividends. But the real money, where was that? My mother wasn't a financial genius. She was a woman who was good at appearances. She wouldn't have been able to run a complex, multi-million-dollar fraud scheme on her own. She was too disorganized. She was all style, no substance. And then I saw it. A name I didn't recognize, buried in the metadata of a PDF she'd accidentally sent me 6 months ago. She'd asked me to delete it, saying it was a client file sent in error. But I hadn't emptied my digital recycling bin. The file was a wire transfer confirmation. A transfer for $150,000 from a bank I didn't recognize to a man named Julian Thorne. The memo line read, "Consulting fee Project V." A quick search for Julian Thorne brought up a very different kind of profile. He wasn't a financial advisor. He was a lifestyle consultant with a slick website, a series of photos of him on yachts and in front of private jets, and a vague bio about maximizing personal assets. He was handsome, polished, and had the kind of disingenuous smile that made my skin crawl. He looked like the physical embodiment of a scam email. This was the person influencing my mother. This was the antagonist. She wasn't just stealing my money to pay for her mortgage. She was being bled dry by a con artist, and she was using my inheritance to fund it. The betrayal felt deeper, more pathetic. She hadn't just stolen from me, she had stolen from me to impress a man who was clearly, laughably, a fraud. The pieces clicked into place. The failed firm of my father's. The emergency loan for the house. It was all a lie. My mother had been liquidating my trust, piece by piece, and handing the money over to this Julian. The rage solidified into something else. Resolve. I wasn't just a victim. I was the only person who could untangle the mess. My mother and her lifestyle consultant had made one fatal error. They had left a digital trail, and I was a data analyst. I knew how to follow it. My shift from passive victim to active strategist was instantaneous. The grief was still there, a cold stone in my stomach, but the anger was a fire, and my data analytics brain was the engine it fueled. The clever trap wasn't something I had to build. It was already there, waiting. The leverage was the data itself. My mother, in her arrogance, had given me all the tools I needed to destroy her. She had mistaken my meticulousness for obedience. My first call was to Matilda. I let it ring once, then hung up. I sent her a text. "Grandma, I'm okay. Do not talk to Mom. I'm working. I have a plan. Please trust me and get your lawyer ready. I will call you from a new phone in 24 hours. Her reply was instant. Done. Burn her to the ground, Rachel. My next step was to secure my investigation. I was working on my laptop, on my home Wi-Fi. That was stupid. My mother was a financial advisor. She was paranoid about security, even if she was incompetent at fraud. She almost certainly had access to our network logs. I grabbed my wallet, my external hard drive, and my laptop. I crept downstairs. My father was still on the couch, now with a wet cloth over his eyes. My mother's office door was still closed. I could hear her muffled, furious voice on the phone. "What do you mean, unavailable?" she was saying. "You tell Julian I need to speak with him now." Good, the rats were getting nervous. I slipped out the front door, got in my beat-up sedan, and drove to my university library. It was the one place I knew I'd have access to high-speed, secure internet, and nobody would think to look for me. I found a secluded carrel in the basement, bought a new, prepaid burner phone with cash, and set up my command center. My first task was to hire professional help. I used some of my own meager savings, the money I'd painstakingly saved from my library job, to hire a freelance forensic accountant I found on a secure professional networking site. I explained the situation. I had reason to believe a trust fund manager was commingling funds and providing fraudulent reports. I didn't say it was my mother. I sent him the Apex Holdings, P.O. box, the wire transfer to Julian Thorne, and the 2 sets of reports. The fake ones for Matilda and the other fake ones for me. While he worked on tracing the corporate shells, I got to work on the data I had. I cross-referenced every date on my mother's college fund, deposits with her personal credit card statements, which I still had access to from when I used to help her categorize her expenses for tax purposes. The pattern was disgustingly clear. On September 10th, a $150,000 consulting fee went to Julian Thorne. On September 12th, a $12,000 charge appeared at a high-end jeweler. On September 14th, a dividend of $3,000 was deposited into my college fund, just in time for the tuition deadline. She was paying for my education with the scraps from her shopping sprees. I built a timeline, a meticulous, color-coded spreadsheet that tracked every single dollar. I traced transfers from the original, legitimate trust bank, which Matilda's lawyer provided me with after a secure call, to a series of shell corporations, each one linked to Julian Thorne. From there, the money was laundered. Consulting fees, investment losses, management expenses, before being funneled into my mother's personal accounts or directly to vendors for things like a new roof, a luxury car lease, and I saw with a fresh wave of sickness my father's angel investment. She hadn't just saved his firm, she had made him an unwilling accomplice in my theft. The forensic accountant I hired was fast. Within 48 hours, he confirmed my findings and added a new, horrifying layer. Julian Thorne wasn't just a lifestyle consultant, he had a history. He specialized in wealthy, dissatisfied women. He had 2 prior lawsuits against him, both settled out of court, from women who accused him of the exact same thing, convincing them to leverage their assets, only to bleed them dry. My mother wasn't his partner in crime. She was his mark. She was just using my money as her buy-in. The sheer, pathetic stupidity of it all was as enraging as the betrayal. I now had an irrefutable, data-driven case. I had bank records, forged documents, a clear money trail, and a professional's report confirming the fraud. My mother, meanwhile, was getting desperate. She had left me 20 more voicemails, her tone shifting from angry to pleading. "Rachel, I'm so sorry, you don't understand," one of them said, her voice thick with what I now recognized as performative tears. Julian, he promised it was a sure thing, an investment in a resort. We were going to double the money, Rachel, double it. I was doing it for you. I saved the voicemail. It was a confession. The final piece of my trap was to get my father on my side. He was weak, yes, but he wasn't a bad man. He was just manipulated. I called him from my burner phone. He picked up on the first ring. "Rachel, oh God, Rachel, where are you? Your mother is falling apart." "Dad," I said, my voice cold and steady. "I'm at the library. I need you to listen to me very, very carefully. Mom didn't just invest my money. She gave it to a con artist named Julian Thorne. She's been lying to all of us. The angel investor that saved your firm, it was my trust fund, Dad. She made you a criminal." There was a long, choked silence on the other end. "No," he whispered, she wouldn't." "I have proof, Dad. I have spreadsheets. I have bank statements. I have a report from a forensic accountant. I'm going to expose her. And when I do, you're either standing next to me as a victim or you're standing next to her as an accomplice. You have to choose." What do you want me to do?" he asked, his voice shaking. "Mom is going to get desperate," I said. "She's going to call a meeting. She's going to try to gaslight us to make Grandma and me look crazy. I need you to agree to the meeting. I need you to make sure it's at Grandma's hotel, not the house. and I need you to act like you're on her side until I get there." It was a terrible thing to ask, to make him lie to his wife, but we were far past the point of polite family disagreements. This was a war, and I was, as my new degree stated, an analyst. I was just analyzing the data and deploying the most logical, effective strategy. My mother, exactly as I'd predicted, called the emergency family meeting 3 days after the disastrous graduation dinner. She had spent the last 72 hours in a frantic tailspin. Julian Thorne had, predictably, vanished. His number was disconnected, his website was down. He had taken his last consulting fee and disappeared, leaving my mother to face the consequences alone. She was desperate, which made her dangerous. She must have known I was digging because she'd tried to log me out of our shared bank accounts and cloud storage, only to find I'd already copied and secured everything. She called my father, who, playing his part, convinced her to meet at Matilda's neutral territory, a private conference room at her hotel. My mother agreed, likely believing she could handle an old woman and a spineless husband. She still thought of me as a child. She assumed I was hiding in my room, crying. I arrived last. I had swapped my graduation gown for a navy blue blazer. I looked, I hoped, professional and cold. I was carrying my laptop, a portable projector, and a grim-faced man in a suit, Matilda's lawyer, Mr. Harrison. My mother, my father, and Matilda were already seated at a long, polished mahogany table. My mother, Catherine, looked terrible. Her eyes were puffy and red, her impeccable blonde hair was a mess, and she was wearing an expensive-looking but wrinkled silk blouse. She was going for the distraught, misunderstood victim look. When I walked in with the lawyer, her face paled. "What is he doing here?" she snapped, pointing at Mr. Harrison. "This is a family matter." "It stopped being a family matter, Catherine, when you committed federal wire fraud," I said, my voice echoing slightly in the sterile room. I set my laptop down and began connecting the projector. "Now, Rachel, don't be so dramatic," my mother said, attempting a patronizing smile. "I know you're upset, and you have every right to be. I made a mistake, a poor investment. I was trying to grow your money to give you an even better future. And this man, Julian, he try. Seeked me. He tricked you," I repeated, powering on the projector. A blank white square appeared on the wall. "He tricked you for 5 years. He tricked you into setting up 3 different shell corporations. He tricked you into forging my grandmother's annual reports." "I never forged anything," she cried, lurching to her feet. "How dare you, David, tell her?" My father just stared at the table, his face ashen. "Don't bother, Dad," I said. "Let's look at the data." I clicked a file. The projector sprang to life. On the wall, in huge, unavoidable clarity, was a document. "This," I said, "is the annual report you sent to Grandma Matilda for the trust. It shows a principal of $3 million growing at a steady 4% interest. Very stable, very boring, and completely fake." I clicked again. A new document appeared beside it. "And this," I said, "is the statement from the actual original trust account, the one you had access to as the sole manager. You see this line, and this one, and this one?" I used my laser pointer to highlight a series of massive withdrawals starting just 3 weeks after the trust was established. "The trust has been empty for almost 2 years, Grandma." She drained it. Matilda let out a low, animalistic sound. She was gripping the arms of her chair, her eyes fixed on the screen. "Where did the money go, Catherine?" I asked, my voice dangerously calm. "You told Dad it saved his firm. You told me it was my college fund. You told yourself it was growing. Let's find out." I pulled up a complex, color-coded flowchart, a Sankey diagram. I had spent the last 48 hours perfecting it. "Here," I said, "is the primary trust. And here are the 3 shell companies you and Julian Thorne created: Apex Holdings, V Project Management, and Thorne Capital." "I don't know what those are," my mother lied, but her voice was weak, trembling. "Don't you?" I clicked again. A copy of the incorporation papers for Apex Holdings appeared. Because that's your signature on the bottom as the sole proprietor. She sat down hard. From these shells, I continued, the money went in three main directions. I pointed to the first branch. 1. Personal luxury. I've cross-referenced your credit card statements with the withdrawals, a $90,000 car lease, a $150,000 jewelry bill, a $250,000 down payment on the house after you'd already told Dad it was paid off. My father flinched as if I'd struck him. 2, I went on, relentless, to Julian Thorne. Over $1.1 million in consulting fees and investment funds sent directly to his offshore accounts. The man you said tricked you, he was your business partner. Or maybe you were just his easiest mark. Stop it, Rachel, she whispered, her hands over her face. You're humiliating me. You want to talk about humiliation? I shot back. You let me apply for scholarships, Mom. You helped me fill out my FAFSA, claiming I had no assets. You made me feel guilty for buying a new pair of jeans. That's humiliation. I pointed to the third and final branch of the diagram. And this is the part that I think Dad will find most interesting. I projected the wire transfer for my father's angel investment. And next to it, the voicemail my mother had left me, the one where she confessed to doubling the money. You didn't just save Dad's firm, Mom, I said. You made him an accomplice. You used my stolen money to make him indebted to you, to silence him. You laundered my inheritance through your own husband's business. My father made a choked, gasping sound. He looked at my mother, his eyes no longer confused, but filled with a cold, clear disgust. My mother's entire defense, her lies, her tears, her performance of the flustered victim, was shattered. The data was irrefutable. I hadn't yelled. I hadn't cried. I had simply presented the facts. She looked up not at me, but at Matilda. Her face was a mask of pure, unadulterated hatred. You, she shrieked. This is all your fault. You always had to have it all, didn't you? You always had to be the smart one, the rich one. You held this money over my head my entire life, and you gave it to her. You were trying to buy her, to turn her against me. You did that all by yourself, Catherine, Matilda said, her voice ice. Mr. Harrison, please proceed. The lawyer, who had been silent this whole time, stood up and placed a thick file on the table in front of my mother. Mrs. Catherine Vance, he said, you are being served. This is a civil suit for the recovery of $3 million, plus damages, interest, and legal fees. We have also, as of this morning, turned over this same file to the district attorney's office. A criminal investigation is now underway. The aftermath of the hotel room confrontation was not a clean break. It was a messy, painful implosion. My mother did not go quietly. Her first move, upon being served, was to launch a desperate, scorched earth campaign. She tried to regain control, spin the narrative. She called me nonstop. When I refused to answer, she emailed. The emails were a masterwork of manipulation, shifting from tearful apologies to vicious accusations. Rachel, my baby, you have to stop this, one email read. You're tearing this family apart. Your father is a wreck. I'm the only one who can fix this. Just tell your grandmother's lawyer it was all a misunderstanding. We can say Julian tricked us both. When that didn't work, the tone changed. You ungrateful child. After everything I've done for you, I clothed you, I fed you, I gave you everything. And this is how you repay me? By siding with that old woman against your own mother, you will regret this. You will be left with nothing. She was wrong. I wasn't being left with nothing. I was building my case. The forensic accountant I'd hired was worth every penny. He had uncovered the full, shocking extent of Julian Thorne's deception. This wasn't just about my mother. Julian had a pattern. We found 2 other victims, 2 other wealthy women from different states who had been charmed, consulted, and subsequently drained. Their stories were identical to my mother's. Mr. Harrison, Matilda's lawyer, was ruthless. He immediately filed injunctions to freeze every asset my mother had. The house, the car, her personal bank accounts, her boutique advisory firm, all locked. The emergency family meeting had been her last stand, and she had lost. But the most difficult part was my father. He was the manipulated loved one, and he was struggling. He had moved out of the house and was staying in a bleak extended-stay hotel. He was broken, torn between the woman he had loved for 25 years and the horrifying, undeniable truth. "I just don't understand how she could do it, Rachel," he said to me over coffee one afternoon. He looked like he'd aged 10 years. "Was it all a lie, our whole marriage?" "I don't know, Dad," I said honestly, placing my hand over his. "She was being manipulated, too, by Julian, but she made a choice. She chose to steal from me to pay him." "She's still your mother," he whispered, defending her even now. "And you're still her husband," I replied, "which is why you need to protect yourself." This was the second, more powerful confrontation. I had to break the spell. I slid a file across the table. It wasn't my data analysis. It was from Mr. Harrison. "What's this?" he asked. "It's the paperwork for the house, Dad, the mortgage, and the loan you took out for your firm." I pointed to a signature line. "Do you recognize that signature?" He put on his reading glasses. He stared at it for a long time. "It looks like my signature," he said. "It's not," I said softly. The district attorney's office had a forensic handwriting expert look at it. "My mother signed your name, Dad. She's been forging your signature on financial documents for at least 3 years. The angel investment you thought you were accepting, you never even signed the papers. She did." That was the moment, the final, terrible realization. It wasn't just that she had lied to him. It wasn't just that she had used my money. It was that she had, in the eyes of the law, implicated him in her crimes without his knowledge. She had been willing to let him take the fall. He didn't yell, he didn't cry. He just very slowly, very carefully, folded the paper, put it back in the file, and pushed it back to me. "Mr. Harrison," he said, his voice a dead monotone. "I'd like to speak with him. I want to file for divorce, and I want to offer my full, unreserved testimony in any case against Catherine." The spell was broken. The antagonist's last-ditch attempt to use my father as a shield had failed. My mother was now truly, completely alone. She had no money, no husband, and no one left to lie to. The case was no longer just my data versus her word. It was her entire family, armed with irrefutable proof, a team of lawyers, and the testimony of other victims, all aligned against her. The escalating stakes had finally reached their peak. The only thing left was the final showdown. The public showdown wasn't a family dinner. It was a courtroom. Specifically, a pre-trial deposition in a sterile, windowless conference room, but it held all the drama of a public execution. My mother, Catherine, had been forced to trade her silk blouses for a drab, off-the-rack suit. Her advisory firm was gone, her accounts frozen. She had been assigned a public defender who looked tired and overwhelmed. On the other side of the long, polished table sat Matilda, Mr. Harrison, a junior associate, my father, David, and me. I had my laptop, plugged into a large monitor at the end of the table. My mother's strategy, it seemed, was to play the confused, grieving wife. "I don't recall. I'm not sure. My husband handled all the finances," she repeated, her voice small and trembling. My father sat like a statue of stone, staring straight ahead. "Mrs. Vance," Mr. Harrison said, his voice bored, "you're claiming you have no knowledge of the Apex Holdings Corporation." I think my husband may have set that up," she murmured, dabbing at her dry eyes with a tissue. "He's an architect. He has so many projects." My father let out a short, harsh laugh. I didn't. Catherine flinched. "David, dear, you're confused. Remember that project in." "Mrs. Vance," I interrupted. My voice was sharp, and every eye in the room turned to me. Even my mother's public defender looked up. "Rachel, please," my mother whispered. "Don't do this." "I'm not doing anything, Mom," I said, clicking my mouse. "The data is, you claim you don't recall Apex Holdings. That's fine." I turned the monitor to face her. "Here is the IP address from which the Apex Holdings website was registered and updated. And here," I clicked again, is a log from your home internet service provider. The IP addresses are a perfect match. It was registered from your home office, on your computer, on a day my father was at a conference in Chicago. I have the receipts. The public defender put his head in his hands. And as for the Thorn Capital investment, I continued, the one you've been claiming was a single foolish mistake. I brought up the timeline. You made 17 separate wire transfers to Julian Thorn over a period of 4 years. Not one, 17. And this, I clicked, bringing up a new window, is an audio file. I believe the court will find it relevant. I hit play. My mother's own voice filled the room, a recording of the desperate voicemail she'd left me. He promised it was a sure thing, an investment in a resort. We were going to double the money, Rachel, double it. I was doing it for you. My mother lunged across the table. You're a monster, she shrieked, trying to grab my laptop. You're recording me, that's illegal. In this state, Mom, only one party needs to consent to a recording, I said calmly, as Mr. Harrison's junior associate gently blocked her. And as I was a party to the call, it's perfectly admissible. You just confessed to intent. The public defender stood up. We need a recess, he said, his voice strained. He pulled my mother, who was now openly sobbing, into the hallway. They were out there for 20 minutes. We sat in silence. My father reached over and for the first time in weeks, squeezed my hand. Matilda just smiled, a small, grim, satisfied smile. When they returned, my mother's face was scrubbed clean of tears. It was blank, empty. My client, the public defender said, his voice flat, is prepared to plead guilty to all civil and criminal charges. In exchange, we request that the court considers leniency in light of her cooperation and her situation. What situation? Matilda asked, her voice like cracking ice. She's a first-time offender. She was manipulated by this Julian Thorn. She has lost everything, her husband, her home. And my daughter? My father's voice boomed in the small room. He stood up, and for the first time, he looked taller than I'd ever seen him. She has lost her daughter, too. He turned to my mother. His face was not angry, it was just empty. I loved you, Catherine, he said, his voice quiet. For 25 years, but the woman I loved wouldn't have done this. She wouldn't have forged my name. She wouldn't have stolen from her own child. I don't know who you are, and I don't want to. That was the final, triumphant action. It wasn't a public humiliation at a party. It was a cold, quiet, legal evisceration. My mother didn't just lose the money, she didn't just lose her freedom. In that moment, watching my father turn his back on her for the last time, she lost her entire past and her entire future. She had, as she'd feared, been left with nothing. My mother, Catherine, was sentenced to 7 years in a low-security federal prison. She pled guilty to wire fraud, bank fraud, and aggravated identity theft. My testimony, combined with my father's and the evidence from Julian Thorn's other victims, was overwhelming. She lost her professional licenses, her reputation, and her freedom. Julian Thorn was eventually apprehended in a non-extradition country, but not for what he did to my mother. He was caught running a different scam, and Matilda, with her long reach and network of very expensive lawyers, made sure the local authorities were well informed of his history. He would not be a problem for a long, long time. The resolution, for the rest of us, was not as simple as a gavel strike. The $3 million was gone. My mother and Julian had burned through all of it. The house was sold at auction, but it barely covered the fraudulent loans she had taken out against it. But the point had never been the money, it had been the truth. My grandmother, Matilda, was magnificent. The day after the sentencing, she took me to lunch at a much nicer restaurant. Well, she said, sip. Ping her martini. That was a dreadful affair. But you, my dear, were brilliant. You're a credit to the Vance name. Your mother. She was always a fool for a handsome face and a quick promise. I, on the other hand, appreciate a woman who can read a balance sheet. She slid a folder across the table. It wasn't a trust fund, it was a job offer. My real estate empire needs a data analytics division, she said. I'm old, Rachel, not stupid. The future is in the numbers. I want you to run it. I'll pay you an obscene salary and I'll match dollar for dollar whatever you lost. Consider it a signing bonus. You'll have your $3 million back within 5 years, and this time you'll have earned it yourself. Which is, I suspect, what you wanted all along. She was right. My father and I began to heal. He filed for divorce. He sold his architecture firm, the one my mother had tainted with stolen money, and started over, smaller. He moved into a modest apartment downtown and started designing community centers and libraries. We had dinner every Sunday. We talked about his new projects, about my new job. We never talked about my mother. The story ended not with a bang, but with a quiet reconciliation. It was me, my father, and Matilda, sitting on the balcony of her penthouse, watching the sunset. My father had just shown us the blueprints for a new children's library. I had just closed my first major deal for Matilda's company, using predictive analytics to identify an undervalued neighborhood. We were a new kind of family, forged in the fire of betrayal and rebuilt on a foundation of truth. My mother's actions had been designed to tear us apart, to isolate me and control her. But in the end, all she had done was reveal who we really were. My father found his spine. My grandmother found an heir. And I found my voice. I was no longer a naive girl or a passive victim. I was a data analyst. I was a strategist. And I was, finally, at peace.